Okay, hello, greetings, welcome to the Geek Battle channel. Today we're going to have a look at Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, if you haven't seen the film, we're going to get all kinds of all over the spoilers stuff. So, if you haven't seen the film yet, I'd hate to turn you away, but don't watch this until you've seen it, because we're going to be talking about the things that happened. We'll be giving my opinions, my reviews of the film, the things I thought were good, the things which I thought weren't so good, what we can expect to come next, and just go into everything Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. If you haven't done so already, please smash that subscribe button on youtube.com/@geekbattle. Without further ado, let's get into it. So I have just come away from the cinema, having seen Ant-Man 3, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And it was an interesting film. Like my initial impression is that it was fine. It was good. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It wasn't spectacular. It wasn't special. I wasn't like, oh my God, this happened. It kind of just happened. It didn't massively offend me in any ways. I did have like lots of thoughts about some of the choices they made, some of which I thought were interesting, some of which I thought could have been better. There was nothing where I was like, oh wow, that was incredible though. But look, I'll stop being vague and let's get into it. So the story, if you don't know, is that Scott Lang, so Paul Rudd's character, and Hope, which is the Wasp, and then Michael Douglas and Michelle Pfeiffer. I forget their names actually. Hank Pym and I'll find out because otherwise I'm going to really struggle to say who this is. But anyway, so Michelle Pfeiffer, and then there's the daughter, the Ant daughter, as it was. So there's Ant-Man, there's the Wasp, and then there's the daughter. Look at this. I can't even find the cast list. Right, so filming, pre-production, characters. So here we go. Oh, Cassie Lang. So I completely forget on that. Is the daughter of Ant-Man. And we have, who is Michelle Pfeiffer's character called? Helen? Is it Helen? I forget. That's embarrassing. Oh, yeah. As Janet. Who was Helen? Not a clue. So anyway, we have the fam, and they get sucked into the quantum realm. And the first thing which I really didn't like, if I have to start with something that bothered me a lot, is a trend that we're seeing in the MCU where characters, for no reason, are like super geniuses. And Cassie Lang, who, when you see the first Ant-Man film, she's like a 5-year-old. Her dad's in prison. And she's got her mum and her stepfather, or would-be stepfather, and she's got like a Thomas the Tank Engine. And then same in the sequel, but then when we have the blip happen after Thanos snaps his fingers, we then have an older Cassie Lang, and she meets Ant-Man, and somehow it turns out that she's become a genius, and she's invented something which can send a signal or whatever into the quantum realm. And I'm like, how? That doesn't make sense. It really bugs me that what they're doing in a lot of these MCU things is that they're creating the next generation of the Marvel, of the Avengers, of the Marvel superheroes, and they've got no reason why they should have their powers or should be geniuses or whatever. So the interesting thing, obviously, with Scott Lang is, of the Avengers, he's the one that should probably not be an Avenger at all. He's a criminal. He's a bit of an idiot. And having that kind of everyman character somehow thrown into the mix, it is what it is, because obviously Hank Pym was the original Ant-Man, and they could have chosen to have Hank Pym as another genius, like you have Tony Stark, like you have Bruce Banner, like you have Peter Parker, who is like, well, he's a teenager. How come he's a genius? But he is the teenager genius. And then suddenly you've got Ant-Man's daughter turns out to be a genius, because even though, well, I don't know, like I forget who was blipped out of the rest of the family, because, well, I think they all were, in fact, because at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp, you had that there was Ant-Man going into the quantum realm in the back of that van, and then outside you had Hank Pym, you had Janet, not Helen, and you had Hope, and they all got blipped, so no one could get Ant-Man out. So why was Cassie then just reading up all of Hank Pym's papers to learn how to create this thing that speaks to the quantum realm? It literally makes no sense, and that bothers me. I can get over it, but if I have to nitpick, it's not even nitpick because it's such a huge plot point of the thing that I'm not so keen of in this story. That is probably it. Now, obviously, we then have Ironheart, the character in Wakanda Forever, and she's like, well, she's 19 and she's invented this this Iron Man suit. And it's like when you watch the first Iron Man film, which started the whole MCU, it's like, yeah, you get whatever his name is, the bad guy, Iron Claw or something, I forget, Ironmonger, that's it. And he's like, Tony Stark built this suit in a cave. And it's like, why can't our geniuses do it? And that was the whole point, because Tony Stark was a true genius, and he'd had years where his dad was a genius and he was developing all these weapons, and he was genuinely a genius himself, that he was able to invent the arc reactor. And then it's just like, oh yeah, but now there's just some 19-year-old kid that can invent it as well. And it's like, okay, so there's two of them. So there's Ironheart and there's Peter Parker, and also somehow Cassie Lang, who we've not seen her be a genius in any of what's happened previously. And I just don't quite get what they're doing, where they're having all of the new Avengers. Like, they've got Ms. Marvel, who she's like, oh, I'm like Captain Marvel. I've got different powers to Captain Marvel, but I've got Captain Marvel kind of powers. I'm going to name myself after Captain Marvel. But it's like Captain Marvel was a soldier, and I'm trying to think who else we've got. Like, just so many. It's like, even like Bruce Banner, he's a genius, and now we've got She-Hulk, who was just a lawyer. And it's not to say that she isn't smart, but she wasn't the genius scientist. And it's like all of the new Avengers just feel like a little bit of a downgrade. And it's like, even what's her name? Like I liked the Hawkeye show, but the new Hawkeye was just a fan of Hawkeye. And so now she's as good an archer as Hawkeye. And it's just like all of the Avengers that you're lining up for the next generation kind of don't live up. They're not geniuses. They're not soldiers. They're just random people. And maybe it's like, well, having the Avengers inspires them. But to me, it's just weird. And like, I know I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I just don't quite get why they're doing this. They need to look, and if people say, oh, but this was true in the comics, but they need to come up with reasons why these characters can be the next lineup of the Avengers, because, you know, you have Hawkeye and Black Widow, they're soldiers, they don't have any powers. And like, you had Falcon, and now Falcon is Captain America, and he doesn't have any powers, but he was still Falcon, he's still a soldier. And you have now, obviously, Black Panther, it passes through, and they explain it that Shuri suddenly has the strength and everything of Black Panther for the reasons, and she was already a genius, and that's fine. But when you just have like random people, suddenly they can just be the next lineup of superheroes. It's just like, I think they should do a little bit better to make it make sense. But anyway, so they get sucked into the quantum realm. And Janet is like, oh yeah, there's something I didn't tell you guys. And then she proceeds to continue to not tell them that you get Hank, Hope, and Janet split off in one area. And then you get Ant-Man and Cassie in another area. And then eventually have to meet up and find each other. But along the way, you suddenly see that in the quantum realm, it's like a whole civilization of people. It is like that episode of The Simpsons, where there's like a Halloween episode of The Simpsons where there's a tiny civilization of people, like microscopic. And it just reminded me of that. And to me, it was just weird that, like, why? Okay, so they're in the quantum realm. So it's not just like happens to be in their room and all over the planet there's going to be microscopic people, but maybe there is. So, but they are in the quantum realm, which exists outside of time and space. And there's humanoids. And not only that, and look, again, this is probably in the comic, but when you suddenly watch this and it's like, and here's Bill Murray, and it's like, wait, Bill Murray was a big letdown in this. He wasn't particularly funny. He turned out to be something of a bad guy, but it was kind of like a nothing role. What I think happened is Paul Rudd was in the last Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and I'm sure he was like, "Hey, like Bill Murray, it'd be great if you wanted to have a part in the next Ant-Man film," and that's clearly to me what happened. And he didn't even interact with Paul Rudd. He was in a scene with Janet and with Hope and with Hank. I need to remember that those were the three clubbed together here. And Janet, Hope, and Hank, it turns out that Bill Murray and Janet used to be a thing. And it's like, well, I had needs and I was in the quantum realm for 30 years. And then Hope is like, ugh. And to me, that was a little bit of a shame, because then Hank was like, well, I had some woman called Linda. And it's like, I don't know. Obviously, it's realistic that he thought that she was lost to the quantum realm forever. He may have found someone else. She, in the quantum realm, it turns out there's a whole civilization. Didn't expect you to ever escape. She found someone else. And it's believable that that would happen, but it's kind of a shame as well. It's kind of a shame just to think that, oh, they didn't truly wait for each other. And so she was with Bill Murray, and he was making these kind of creepy remarks and just like suggestive remarks about what had happened in their relationship. And he really wasn't in it much. He was almost like Saruman from Lord of the Rings, in that Gandalf seeks out Saruman. It's like, oh, well, our enemy is returning. Sauron is returning. And then Saruman is like, oh, the hour is later than you think. And then he turns against Gandalf. And in this, it was like Janet was like, I need to find Bill Murray. And then as soon as she finds Bill Murray, he's like, well, actually, I've teamed up with Kang. And she's like, I can't believe we fought Kang together. And he's like, he's more powerful than you think. Now I'm on his side. And then they throw down like one of the things that makes small things big. And Bill Murray had like eaten some live squid thing in a drink. And then it just attacked him. And that was the end of Bill Murray. Bill Murray was in this as much and as effectively as he was in the 2016 Ghostbusters, where he turned up, had like 2 scenes and got killed off. It was a real waste. My expectation of Bill Murray in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania was we were going to bring back the flavor of Jeff Goldblum in the third Thor film. That's a tongue twist to say, but Thor Ragnarok, where you've got Jeff Goldblum being Jeff Goldblum, and it's really funny and entertaining. I was expecting Bill Murray to just be Bill Murray. Look, he's not a young guy anymore, so maybe he didn't want to be in it tons, but what he did do wasn't all that special. It was okay, but it wasn't all that special. So anyway, meanwhile, whilst Hank and Helen, I go to keep saying Helen, no, Hank, Hope, and it's because his name's Henry, apparently, like Hank. I didn't know that Hank and Henry were the same name, but they said that, and I thought that was like Bill Murray instantly forgetting his name, but then Janet called him Henry, so unless she was making a joke the same as Bill Murray had made, I don't know. But anyway, so Hank, Janet, and Hope suddenly are then trying to get away from Bill Murray, and they're flying a ship where Hank Pym is like, oh, you got to stick your arms all the way in, way, and he's flying this weird alien-like spaceship. And on the other side of things, you have Drink the Juice. As it's weird, they have like a scene where for some reason Cassie has been given some juice or some goo to drink first, and then it makes it so you can understand the beings on this place. Now, I do appreciate that they did something to explain that, well, look, they don't all speak English, they've got their own language, but when you drink some of this weird goo character that they have, like Ditto from Pokemon, when you drink some of his goo, then it means that you can understand people. It's the only explanation they give, and it makes no sense whatsoever, but they do it, and at least it is an explanation for why they can understand people that live in the quantum realm. And so then they see that there's this whole civilization of people. And the thing that was a bit of a shame to me is that as I was watching it more and more, I was like, this feels less like Ant-Man 3. And I know lots of people have said that. It doesn't really feel like Ant-Man 3. But to me, it felt like it was Guardians of the Galaxy spin-off, because we were just with these alien people, and most of them, it was just like, oh, look, we're just going to use a lot of the same actors over and over again. So just put on some like red Star Wars hoods and masks, and then we'll like have like that big Amazon woman. I can't remember like who she is, but she was basically like Wonder Woman, and she was like the leader. You had the goob guy, the gooey guy, and then you had like a guy it was literally taser face. His face was like a laser, and these were the good guys. Then you had a guy that could read minds, which came into it in a few ways, but it was kind of like what you'd expect for you got a mind reader. Oh, you're lying and stuff like that. These group of rebels were fine. But it was just like, right, so we're just going to end up introducing the idea that, oh, Janet, we need to find Janet. And then the leader, Wonder Woman, she's like, what did you say? Who's that name? And it's like, oh, we need to get away from Janet because Kang is going to come for her. We see the backstory of Janet and Kang, that when she was trapped in the quantum realm, that Kang somehow crash landed there. And then she helped him to repair his ship, but somehow as soon as you touch the thing where it's going to be touch the power source, it gave her visions of what he was up to, and so that he was like this conqueror. And so then she did something to use the pin particles to make his power source huge so then he couldn't use it. And then she's been on the run whilst he was not back to full strength, but he'd got enough strength back so that he could become like a dictator in this land. And God knows how many years ago that was, because it would just be interesting to see how, because the interesting thing, and I know I'm just thinking this out loud, but the show Loki introduced He Who Remains, which was a variant of Kang. And until the end of the series of Loki, where He Who Remains got killed, or whatever happened that meant that all of the timelines were going to start branching off, it didn't make sense that Janet would have met Kang, because there would have only been He Who Remains. There would have been no variants of Kang, because I believe in the show Loki they explain that there were no other variants of Kang because he had them all pruned. So how was this timeline, the sacred timeline, able to have Janet with a variant of Kang? Except for it was, I guess, in the quantum realm, which exists outside of time and space. So maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't. But either way, Kang is there. And the actor's name slipped me. Jonathan Majors, I believe, is playing Kang the Conqueror. And yeah, he was good. He didn't play it exactly as he played He Who Shall Remain, or He Who Remains. It was a different variant, and so had a different personality. And this felt much more like a General Zod, sort of like, kneel before Zod. I'm going to speak very calmly, and I'm going to conquer, and then I'll be vicious. It was good. I don't know yet if I'm convinced that this will... Now, obviously, this is going to be a Thanos-level villain. We saw him in Loki, and it was a variant. And then, once again, I've said this is going to have spoilers. It's a variant that we're seeing in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, because seemingly at the end, Kang gets killed. Now, whether or not this version of Kang comes back, or just a variant does in the future films, because we got Avengers Secret Wars and Avengers Kang Dynasty coming out in a few years' time. Who knows how many times we'll see Kang between now and then. The post-credit scene teased... Now, the post-credit scene was perhaps the most exciting thing of this, because there was two of them. The first one showed like a stadium, or like an arena, like where you'd have like the Romans gathered around, and everyone there was Kang. And there was different. There was like an Egyptian Kang, there was a blue Kang, there was a business Kang, and there was like a smooth skin Kang, because the other ones have got like some scars down their face. And there seemed like three wise ones, and then there was just like an audience of Kangs. And the interesting thing, which did bother me slightly, was that they were all, again, Jonathan Majors, which I'm just going to double check that is the guy's name. So where does it say this? I don't know. I can't see. Doesn't list it here. Cassie Lang. Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, Jonathan Majors. I was right. So everyone looked like Jonathan Majors. But we know that we can have Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire all be Peter Parker. Now, we can have more than one Tom Hiddleston looking Loki, and then we can have female Loki. We can have Richard E. Grant Loki and Alligator Loki. Why were all of the Kangs Jonathan Majors? I felt that was a mistake. And maybe because I saw it once and there was a ton of people there, maybe there were some variants. But it still goes on the idea that if there is an infinite number of possibilities in the multiverse, then for every single Tobey Maguire, there should be 1 million of them. And for every single Andrew Garfield, there should be 1 million. So the idea that we see multiple Lokis that are Tom Hiddleston doesn't quite make sense if we don't then see multiple Lokis that are also alligators, and multiple Lokis that are Kid Loki, or multiple barbaric Loki or classic Loki or whatever. There should be tons of each, not just, oh, here is the one girl Loki. There should be as many girl Lokis as there are guy Lokis, and so on and so forth. Now, we did see Loki, is the interesting thing. The second post-credit scene was the most interesting. We saw another Kang. So even though this was Ant-Man and the Wasp, the post-credit scenes didn't have anything to do with Ant-Man or the Wasp, but they're setting up Kang the Conqueror, and that's fine. And so the first one, we saw all of the Kangs gathered, and then the second one, we saw another Kang, and it got like the funky hairdo, which was a bit Sideshow Bobbish, with a bit going out the top, a bit going out the sides and stuff like this. And then it turned out he was like Professor Kang. And in the audience was Loki and Owen Wilson. I forget Owen Wilson's character's name, but they're from the TVA, the Time Variant Agency, or whatever it was called. And for me, the thing which I was excited most about is that the MCU shows on Disney Plus, they're part of the MCU and they count as part of the MCU as much as anything, but they do need to make it so that when you watch the movies, that you don't need to have watched the Disney Plus shows. So for the fact that they suddenly show Loki in the audience, people might be like, I thought Loki was dead. Most people probably won't be like that, but it was a break of form of like, why is Loki there? And they'll also be like, hey, is that Owen Wilson? But the thing I was most excited about is that even if it's just in this tiny cameo role setting up Loki season 2, I like the idea that Owen Wilson has had a role in an MCU movie, not just like the Disney Plus show. And I forget the name of his character. I'm not going to look it up. But so that's going to set up that Kang will be in Loki season 2. And it'll be interesting to see how many variants of Kang get killed off before we meet the big bad version of Kang. Because to me, it was a little bit like in Doctor Who. If you're a Doctor Who fan, you'll get this. If not, then you won't. But when they introduced the character played by Jenna Coleman, which was Clara Oswald, she had variants basically, because there was many versions of her throughout time. And the first 2 or 3 times the Doctor met her, she got killed. And then he eventually stopped her getting killed, but it just seemed like she was just going to get killed over and over again until you met the truly important one. And maybe it's going to be the exact same deal in the MCU, that you see Kang the Conqueror, and he who remains gets killed by Sylvie in the Loki series. And then you see, or he who remains, I should say. But then you see Kang the Conqueror, definite Kang the Conqueror in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, and he gets killed, seemingly. Maybe he'll be back. But then they show that there's an arena of them. And unless they're going to use these Kang the Conquerors like they use the Jitari, I can't remember. Maybe that's not the bad guys from Avengers. I can't remember. But I think they're called the Jitari or something like this, where there's just like thousands of them and they all just get wiped out as cannon fodder. That's like, imagine if you had 1,000 Thanoses. It's like that would be a lot tougher army than all of the minions. But if they're going to have all of the variants as the minions that get wiped out over and over again, then that's going to be a lot of CGI or a lot of having to reshoot the same scene for Jonathan Majors. But the interesting thing is that they did have Kang defeated, and there was a few ways in which he was defeated. I'm going to get to Modoc in a second. But for this to be the next Thanos level threat, in this film, we had Kang the Conqueror kind of taken out by ants. Now, they may have been technologically enhanced ants, but they were ants. Like, Hank Pym just set an army of ants on him, and he put up a dome like the baddies in Avengers Infinity War, trying to get through the Wakandan force field. Kang had a force field, and the ants are trying to push their way through. It was the exact same deal. And it's like, well, if you put that many ants, but it's like, it was only a small dome. You can't pile up that many ants against it. So it means that his force field wasn't that strong. And then Modoc, who we'll get to more in a moment, turned good guy at the end and sort of was the one to break the force field. And then the ants carried him away. But they didn't quite kill him. And just as all of the good guys are about to go back through to normal reality, away from the quantum realm, you had suddenly Kang reappears and gets into a fist fight with Ant-Man. Now, Ant-Man stood opposite Kang. They're the same size. So when Ant-Man shrinks down, he suddenly, his power is enhanced because all the atoms are close together, or whatever their explanation is. But once he's shrunk down and Kang is also shrunk down, they're both microscopically small. Kang has still got all of the powers that he could just like flick, and like Ant-Man would be flung up against the wall. Maybe it's that he didn't have his powers because his suit was damaged. But to me, it was like, so Ant-Man without even his helmet, so he didn't even have his complete Ant-Man costume, is a match for Kang the Conqueror in a fist fight. Now, Kang, was beating Ant-Man up, but it wasn't over. And case in point, Ant-Man was starting to get the better of him when he used, he played dirty. He used the Pym particles on the power source or whatever to sort of like suck him in. But it's like Kang didn't just handily defeat him. Now, if the Incredible Hulk can't really defeat Thanos in a fist fight, does it seem that Kang the Conqueror is that much of a threat if Ant-Man, who has no powers, can actually hold his own for at least a little bit in a fist fight with Kang the Conqueror? Now, obviously, we then had that Hope jumped back through, and good. Yeah, this film is Ant-Man and the Wasp. And so fine, it started just the first one as Ant-Man, even though she was in it. But then they like upgraded her to co-billing Ant-Man and the Wasp. But she didn't really do a ton in this film. So when she came in and like did the whole Sarah Connor T-1000 thing from Terminator 2, where as Kang's like trying to get away, she's like bang, 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 knocking him back into the thing that's going to knock him away or whatever. And then Ant-Man comes in with like uppercut and knocks Kang back, and that's how they finish off Kang. Maybe something else happened, I can't remember. But then they managed to get away somehow, because that wasn't even quite clear. Something with Cassie reopening the link to the quantum realm, and they actually managed to get through. But how she found them and how they could just open a portal in the exact right spot, who knows? But they did it. Now, that was all fine. So the thing that we need to talk about at this stage is Modoc. Modoc has been the thing that there's been all of the memes ever since the trailers showed that Modoc was in this film. And it's not the same Modoc from the comic books. And apparently, when I did a little bit of research on this a couple of weeks ago, there's been various versions of Modoc over the years anyway. It's not always the same story. The acronym Modoc sometimes is like mental this or metallic that. And I think this was machine. I will try to find out what this Modoc actually stood for. But it was the character who was Yellow Jacket in the first film. It doesn't say. Or does it say? It doesn't say what Modoc is, but it was the character Darren Cross who was Yellow Jacket in the first Ant-Man film. And this was a great idea if they didn't originally intend it. But when Yellow Jacket is defeated in the original Ant-Man film, he's sort of like, his arm shrinks away and he shrinks away and then he shrinks into nothing. And you think, well, he's got sucked into the quantum realm and it's happened bit by bit. But what I love the idea is that when he landed there, his arms stayed significantly smaller. And they showed like back view of naked Modoc, just like with these spindly legs and like the round butt and stuff like this. And Kang found him and turned him into this killing machine, like designed only for killing. And Scott Lang made the joke about, wouldn't that be Modoc or something like this, however you'd pronounce it with the F in it. You know, I understand why they exclude the F, because it makes it slightly more difficult to pronounce. Now, the graphics on Modoc were probably up there with The Rock in The Scorpion King as being like the worst graphics ever. There's like Shark Boy and Lava Girl, or whatever that film is that came out a few years, Spy Kids 3 or something like this. And I never watched it, but I've seen the memes about it now. They had a character that was just like a big head inside like a jar or something, and it looked kind of naff. And this looks worse. This was worse than the graphics on She-Hulk, which weren't the most convincing. And in particular, like the Hulk's son, like Bruce Banner's son at the end of She-Hulk, just like the graphics on it were terrible. But this was, I think, the worst graphics I've seen of any character in the MCU. It was like it was just like someone's face, and as they did the talking, they'd stretched things. I don't think it was all computer animated. It wasn't like Thanos. It wasn't like Hulk. It was just like they'd pinched in his nose and they'd stretched out his cheeks and stuff like that. And as he moved, it seemed like it wasn't consistent, and his eyes were just like sort of like pulled at an angle and like slightly stretched out as like, so his eye was slightly elongated, so it was more like a goat's eye or something. I don't know. It looked awful. And other than it looking bad, now I always feel like they should have made it look as bad as possible, like the Scorpion King with the bad graphics on Dwayne The Rock Johnson. They should have gone all in on it looking bad if they wanted it to look bad. What I liked, though, I wasn't a huge fan of Cassie's character in this film. I don't like it in films. Like I said about this on the Geek Battle show 2 or 3 weeks ago, I watched Die Hard 5, and in Die Hard 4 and Die Hard 5, both of John McClane's children are like, well, hey, John. And he's like, why don't you call me Dad? And whereas Cassie like loved her dad in the first couple of Ant-Man films and was pleased to see him in Avengers, it was suddenly that she was like, well, I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to be rebellious and not talk to you. But it was the thing that won me over for Cassie was that Cassie was like, hey, Modoc, don't be a dick. And he's like, you sure? And she's like, it's never too late to not be a dick. And it was just a really good line. And I was like, okay, you've won me over, Cassie, at that point, because it was a good line. And then when Modoc turned into being a good guy, he's like, I'm done being a dick. And that was funny. There wasn't tons of really good humor in this, but that one did make me laugh. And then again, Modoc kind of stole the humor show for me here, just because when Modoc helped break Kang's force field, and then Modoc was like blown up from it, he was like dying, and Hope hadn't seen him at all, and they had to address the fact that, well, their paths hadn't crossed, and she was like, Darren, and he was like, hey, Hope, and she was like, what the hell happened to you? And Scott was like, oh, I'll explain. And then there's like the weird, like someone whoever came up with this in the writer's room or something, it was a really funny idea. As Modoc is dying, he just turns to Ant-Man and he's like, I always saw you as a brother, which didn't exist anywhere in the first Ant-Man film. There was nothing remotely like that. And Scott's sort of like, really? He's like, okay, yeah, I saw you as a brother too. And then he sort of like touches his face, and like the hand is like somewhat normal proportion, so it didn't look like the little spindly hand. But like Scott's a bit like, oh, this is gross. And it's like, at least when I died, I went out as an Avenger. And Scott was like, that's right, you made the team, sort of thing like this. And it was just like, it's the amazing idea of, oh, wouldn't it just be funny if he's like, hey, I've always seen you as a brother, when there was nothing to suggest it, just because it seems like something that a character, an important character who dies a heroic death, might say to a loved one, or give their approval, or say something meaningful to the person that they're not going to like see again. but it just didn't fit because these things didn't happen in the past Ant-Man films. So it was just really funny for he's like, at least I went out as an Avenger. And look, so, cool for him that he said he went out as an Avenger because he went out heroically. But also, would he know about the Avengers? The answer is definitely yes, but so much has happened since the first Ant-Man film. The first Ant-Man film, I think, was Phase 2. So we'd had Captain America, but no one knew who Captain America was in the first Captain America film. The first Thor film, stuff did happen on Earth. The Incredible Hulk film, did people really know? Yeah, they knew about the Incredible Hulk, and they knew about Iron Man. And then when the Avengers thing happened with Loki, that was known about. Iron Man 3 would have happened. How public that stuff was, I probably was. But then it was like Ant-Man. And so people wouldn't have known. So people would have known of the Avengers, but they wouldn't have known so much that the Avengers were a thing. Because one of the things that has bothered me throughout the last phase of the Avengers is that all of the Avengers are now like celebrities. And to me, that's always been a bit weird. Like, I know in Spider-Man, they're like, Spider-Man, we hate him in the old films. And then it's like, oh, it's Appreciate Spider-Man Day. But to me, it always feels weird that they have like merchandise, and Scott Lang's got a book out in this one, and that's fine. But it's always just struck me as weird that they've started to deal with the idea that the superheroes are celebrities and that people want to take photos with these real-life superheroes. But I don't know, like, for me, this film didn't do anything majorly wrong. I've really honed in on what I didn't like. Like, the graphics on Modoc was bad. Making Cassie kind of grumpy with her dad and stuff didn't quite work for me. And making her a super genius for no reason didn't work for me, because Hank could have come up with something, or maybe even Hope, because I don't even think they explain that Hope is as intelligent as somehow Cassie is shown to be. But there was like, and look, everyone's raved about Kang and it was fine, but I feel like they kind of made him look a bit weak if he could get beat by Ant-Man. Because even like when you see Thanos and he's like this, and there's Captain America like trying to fight off Thanos, and like Thanos is surprised that Captain America, who's a super soldier but he's far from the most powerful of the Avengers, has got like the heart to fight him back. The fact that Ant-Man can get into a fist fight with Kang and hold his own tells you that Kang isn't what he needs to be yet. Now, will we get Kang from like these 1,000 variants? And there's a multiverse, so there should be millions of Kangs. And maybe for every universe where there's a Kang, there should be others where Kang didn't exist, I suppose. So for how many universes have Kang, which again should be an infinite amount, it's that, so are we going to get all of the Kangs where every single bad guy in the Kang dynasty is just another Kang? And then how will you decide who is the leader Kang? And I suppose it will be the 3 that we saw at the post-credit scene, and maybe the Kang from this version came back. So that will be interesting to see, but I didn't think they completely convinced me that Kang is the next Thanos. He didn't seem, he was better than a lot of the bad guys we've had, that they definitely gave more time to develop him, but I wasn't completely convinced yet. What was the other thing I was just about to say? I know I'm jumping all over the place. I'm trying to remember this movie that I saw like an hour ago. There was something important. Oh yeah, so the very end, they bookend the film with Scott Lang being like, "So this is my life. Who could have imagined just walking down the street and me, I'm an Avenger? Who'd have thought that when I was in prison?" And then at the end, it's like, "So here's me back to my life." But then he has like this really kind of creepy moment almost, where it's like, "But what if I did the wrong thing? What if, what Kang said is that, I need to do this, or otherwise it's going to be much worse." And it was interesting that they put that in there. And it definitely gives the sense that I think we'll get Ant-Man 4. Like, Ant-Man they didn't write out Ant-Man. When you see some of the other films, it's like, or the TV series, is that they had WandaVision and Wanda was still active at the end, but Vision had been written out, but there was still White Vision, so he's out there somewhere. But then with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, they kind of wrote out Wanda. In what was I going to say? In Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they established that Falcon is now Captain America, and they kind of established that Steve Rogers is gone. They wrote out Iron Man, obviously in Avengers Endgame, and they made it clear that the other Spider-Men probably aren't coming back at the end of the last Spider-Man, and they also made it so no one remembered Spider-Man. So it's like, well, would Spider-Man naturally pop up with the Avengers again? Who knows? We also got, not that the original Hawkeye was written out, but obviously with Jeremy Renner having that bad accident at the end of last year, maybe Jeremy Renner will kind of be written out, and then just, I forget the character's name, but the new Hawkeye will have to step into his shoes, just as Chadwick Boseman passed away, and then the character of Shuri became the new Black Panther. So there's been some like natural transitions, and there's been some that have felt a bit more like they're lining up replacements. In this, it feels like all of the characters should still be in Ant-Man 4, if they make an Ant-Man 4, or it feels like they should be back for the next Avengers film. And how important Ant-Man will be when he's like, wow, I saved the universe with the whole, or the rat that saved the universe, when Ant-Man came back and says, hey, I was in this thing called the quantum realm, and I have this idea about time travel because time works differently. And then he could say he saved the universe to defeat Thanos. He can now say he defeated Kang the Conqueror and saved the universe again. How important Ant-Man will be, because he'll be the main one, along with, obviously, with, well, I guess Janet should be the main one who knows about battling Kang. But Hope and this list of characters, Hank and Janet and Cassie, they've all fought Kang before. So when they come up, when the Avengers come up against Kang, they'll be like, okay, Ant-Man will be like, yeah, we're going to have round 2 here, which is a good thing that they can establish that, because obviously Loki could stand with the Avengers and be like, I know who this is as well. Whereas one of the problems they had with Thanos is Thanos had to be like, Stark, and then Tony Stark was like, you know me? And it's like, no, you've never met. You've got this main villain, and he has no relationship with any of the main Avengers, and he only has a passing relationship with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and only particularly knows Nebula and Gamora. So if they can establish that Ant-Man and his team, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Loki and whoever else, Owen Wilson, and then perhaps some other characters have run-ins with Kang before we get to Avengers Kang Dynasty, it will up the stakes there significantly. But anyway, I'm gonna. There was none of the friends of Ant-Man in this film. It's the last thing I'll speak about before I wrap this up. So in the first 2 Ant-Man films, there was like the side characters, and it was Ant-Man's criminal buddies, including the guy who was in Grace Point, who was like a really serious character. It's a weird reference to pull him out of the air for that character, but I can't remember what else he was in. And he was like Luis, like Lewis or Luis, not Louise, Luis or whatever. And he's so funny. He was like this cheeky, chappy kind of character. And he wasn't in this one. And I was devastated. And they barely had the old films Ant-Man themes. Like literally the soundtrack didn't really sound like the other Ant-Man films. And I'm sure there were other things in the past Ant-Man films which I know didn't really get carried over. Because again, as people have pointed out, this mostly focused on establishing Kang. And people said, oh, Ant-Man wasn't important in the Ant-Man film. And I agree somewhat, but I feel like they did make it so that Ant-Man versus Kang, having to rescue his daughter, and the stuff with Hank and Hope and Janet. Now that's even slightly separate, because obviously Hope goes out with Scott, with Ant-Man, but then like, do they feel as invested to rescue Cassie? Because they've only known her a very short while. But whatever, I digress. So it'll be interesting to see where they take Ant-Man next. I felt like he was important to this, where they had obviously the stakes with him rescuing his daughter, but it wasn't as much about Scott Lang as it could have been. But I thought it was a good film. I didn't think it was the greatest film. If I had to give it out of 5, I would give it 3.5. I don't think it quite deserves 4. It deserves more than 3. It was fine. It was definitely one which I'll watch again in the future. If I'm like watching through the MCU films, it won't feel like, to me, like one where it's like, oh, I've got to watch this just to watch it all. I liked it more than like the Eternals. I thought I really didn't like. It was very long and there's so many characters, and I didn't particularly like a lot of them. I thought it was better than that. I liked it more than the Black Widow film, but I think I need to watch that again. I liked it probably more than Shang-Chi. I didn't particularly like that one either. And Doctor Strange 2 was all right. Thor 4 wasn't that great in my opinion. So I thought it was better than some, but I still feel that Marvel has been on a little bit of a decline. But I would like to see what they do next. Last piece of trivia I'll say, because I'm just thinking of these. Apparently this was the 31st Avengers film in the MCU. And I assume that means the Avengers films, like the MCU films, and it doesn't count the Disney Plus series to add up to this number. But the thing that was interesting for me about that is, and most people who watch this won't have a clue what I'm talking about, there's a series of films from the UK made between 1958 and 1979, with one film that came later in 1992 called the Carry On films. And I don't know that there's a series of films that have got more entries than the Carry On films. It's kind of like an anthology in that the characters don't recur, but it's the same actors. But there were 31 of those films overall. And I know that there was like 20 James Bond films, but this, I think, is actually going to overtake the Carry On films for a series of films. They've got a higher number when the next film comes out, which I think is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up there. I know this has been a bit of a ramble. This is a little bit of an experiment for me, just because I'll upload this as a podcast. So if you're listening to it as a podcast, do check out the video version as well. You'll be able to see me like sit around and just jabber away as I'm trying to remember everything that I've just watched a couple of hours ago. But obviously we do have the weekly Geek Battle show, which isn't just me. We have a regular panel or a revolving cast of panel of people where we talk about all of like the latest movies, TV shows, video games, anything within geek culture. We play a few like fun games. I don't mean like video games. We do like challenges and stuff that are geeky related. You'll be able to see that on this channel as well, and that's usually on a Wednesday at about 7 p.m. UK time, so do check that out tomorrow. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I do know that not everyone is going to have seen it, so this was an opportunity for me to be able to deep dive into everything I've just seen without having to hold back. Like we spoke about Wakanda Forever a couple of weeks ago, and someone on the show hadn't seen it, and it came out in November. So this will be the way in which I'll be able to give reviews and opinions, and I'm going to do some written reviews as well for the Extreme.tv website. So up there you'll see www.extreme.tv. So do check that out by tomorrow, and there'll be this video as well as a written review of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And do make sure you smash the subscribe button to youtube.com/@geekbattle, because there's going to be tons more reviews and tons more stuff coming up. We've just put up a couple of like other geeky kind of stuff, like some reviews of action figures. We've got some documentaries on there and all kinds of good stuff. So please like, share, subscribe, ding the notification bell and all that. And until next time, ciao for now.